Hello, welcome. My name is Gabriel, and today I'm going to be running you through all of the books that I read in February. February was a bit of a wildcard month. I picked things up with no plan for what I was doing, just trying to get as much read as possible before March hit and the War and Peace read-along took over my life. So I'm excited to share these books with you today because I think a number of them are going to be really unexpected. First up is The People in the Trees by Hanya Yanagihara. This is the debut novel of Yanagihara, who wrote one of my absolute favorites, that is A Little Life. This book is about Norton Perina, a fictional scientist who attends an anthropological expedition to the island Ivu Ivu, where he and a team of researchers discover a lost Stone Age tribe, as well as a turtle, which when eaten can make you live for hundreds of years. The discovery makes Norton famous, and he goes on to have a very long, successful career, but the book opens with a series of articles which inform you that he has been accused of sexually assaulting one of his children who he adopted from the island. The rest of the book is framed as a memoir that he is writing from prison, where he is reflecting on his life and attempting to preserve his legacy. An interesting part of this framing device is the character Ronald, who is Norton's editor. He's a great friend and a great admirer. Actually, there's an introduction from Ronald's perspective, and in it he details all of the legal proceedings, but also Norton's entire influential career. His unparalleled scientific contributions, as well as his incredible humanitarian work. So right off the bat, this book makes you question what is the difference between a good person and a great scientist. And it also explores what it means to love and admire somebody who is a monster. And then we get into Norton's perspective, and I have just pages of completely incomprehensible notes for this book. I was going to talk about them all here, but then I realized that would take like 20 minutes, so I think I'm just going to do a dedicated review for it. The writing style is very interesting. Yanagihara embraces the fact that she is writing from the perspective of a scientist, and so it's very observational and analytical, but she does a remarkable job cultivating all of these different atmospheres, whether it's like the cold, monotonous labs or the lush island jungle. And the narrative voice is actually really compelling because Norton is so passionate about what he's talking about. I've read other books from the perspective of scientists that get so boring just because it's clear that the author has no interest in what the character is studying, and thus the character is completely passionless. But something Yanagihara does so well is getting really into everything that her characters are passionate about so that they can just go on for pages and pages and it's never boring. The book is also remarkably grounded in reality. Even though she's invented this new island and new culture, she did a lot of work to construct their language and to describe their environment. And even though the scientific discovery, a turtle that makes you live forever, seems fantastical, she grounds everything, if not in actual science, then in the actual scientific culture of the time period. And the editor, Ronald, also inserts himself into the narrative using footnotes to expand on all of Norton's ideas and what the scientific community was like at the time. And so between the analytical writing and like the groundedness in reality, everything that happens in this book not only feels real, but it feels like it did happen. And that's kind of a feature of Yanagihara's writing. Like, no matter how crazy her plot points are, it feels not only realistic, but like what would naturally happen and what did happen. And so that makes you accept even like the craziest of things. And that applies even when she writes something that is just objectively weird, because Hanya Yanagihara has this obsession with writing the most disturbing books imaginable. Sometimes you will just be reading and vibing, and she will just hit you with the most upsetting thing you have ever read in your entire goddamn life, and you just have to go about your day. But no matter how crazy the thing that happens is, you're just like, okay, yeah, that has to happen because everything else makes so much sense. How could it not? And that makes this book so tense and crazy, because while Norton's voice is really compelling and interesting, he is also a really cold and cruel man. You are clearly not meant to agree with everything that is happening, but it like forces you into these very deeply uncomfortable scenarios. There's a sensation that comes with reading Hanya Yanagihara's books that I don't think any other author captures, which is just like true dread, where like you're turning the page and you feel this deep weight pressing down on your chest. I feel like she puts her readers through a great amount of emotional turmoil, but I always feel like I emerge from her books with like a sense of clarity or an ability to articulate something that I hadn't before. And I think that that makes it worth reading them, no matter how upsetting they might be. The book also has so many interesting conversations about like colonialism and immortality being a curse and fame being a kind of immortality and how that ties in with the turtle. And there's also this meta narrative about this book is based on an actual scientist that Yanagihara knew in real life. And I could talk about this book for hours, so I'm just going to save that for my later review. I will say that I think this book is genius. I think it's brilliant, but I definitely do not think that it is for everyone. If what I've said entices you, absolutely give it a chance, but it is true that she writes really disturbing books, and there are certain images that will stick with you whether you want them to or not. After that, I read Six Tragedies by Seneca, translated by my favorite, Emily Wilson. So, I got this book a year ago after I finished Emily Wilson's Odyssey, and I wanted to read these because I thought that her translation of the Odyssey was so exciting and fun and accessible, and then I quickly learned that her Odyssey was like that because that's just what Homer's writing is like, and Seneca's is not like that at all. It is very dense and just packed with really obscure references to a million different myths, and I just did not have the grasp on mythology or even just the reading comprehension to understand what was going on. This time around, they made a lot more sense to me. I think just after a year of reading like as much as I have, my comprehension has gotten better, and I was able to really appreciate these. I took notes on like each individual play in here, so I'll just rush through those. First up is Medea. This play is about Medea, the wife of Jason the Argonaut, who chooses to murder her own children when her husband decides to leave her. This play has some incredible lines and just really powerful language. There's also a very interesting internal struggle because Medea really does love Jason, but she is so overwhelmed with rage that she just needs to do something cruel in order to let that out. Then there is Trojan Women. This play is about the immediate aftermath of the fall of Troy at the end of the Trojan War, when the Greek soldiers are deciding what to do with the women of Troy. They sell them into slavery. This one has the best dialogue. It's really tense and exciting, and these are all short, so I don't have too much to say about them individually. Phaedra is about a woman who falls in love with her stepson, and after she confesses her feelings for him, he does not reciprocate, so she accuses him of assaulting her. I read this one on Valentine's Day, and it was just very funny to see like the depiction of love as this like cruel, evil thing, and Cupid as a cruel god. Then there is Oedipus, which is about a man who finds out he has been married to his mother. It's about how fate will always find you. You can't run from prophecies. And this play is really bloody and violent. And it made me think about how in these like ancient like Greek and Roman tragedies, they tap into a level of human nature that is just so feral and fundamental and just like primally violent. And I don't think that something like this, well, I didn't think that something like this could be written today, but then I realized that's what Hanya Yanagihara does. Oedipus was not written to make you feel good. It was meant to evoke, it was meant to tap into just like the greatest rage and grief and sorrow that a person can experience. And these plays have stuck around for so long because of that. And yet people want to like shoot Hanya Yanagihara down for wanting to explore something just as intense. I think she's a genius. And I think that this book and A Little Life are going to be around for 2,000 years, so sue me. Then I read Hercules Furens. I didn't really like it. It's about how Hercules, after returning from the underworld, the goddess Juno hates him, so she like makes him go insane and kill his family. Around this point, I started to realize that maybe you shouldn't read these plays like back to back because they're all about like somebody committing a heinous crime, realizing what they've done, and then killing themselves or trying to. And then I read Thyestes, which, what is it even about? Oh, it's about a man who is the brother of a prince who has been exiled, but he returns to the kingdom, and his brother, who is the king, thinks that he is returning in order to steal the throne, so the king kills him preemptively for no reason. Yes, I am aware none of that made sense. You get it, right? I don't have many individual thoughts on that one either, but I think that if any of those plays sound interesting to you, definitely check this out, because even if they are really like dense, I think that Emily Wilson has an amazing grasp of like poetry, and she brings out some really cool, powerful language and imagery in these. I'll try and find like a couple underlined passages. Ah, this one's from Medea. She says, "This very day I will do a deed of which all days will speak. I will attack the gods. I will shake the world." I also noticed the page before that, there's this whole like paragraph about how like the world is so old and civilization has reached its end point, and this is 2,000 years old. So I thought that was funny because we're still writing things today like Angels in America about how humanity has progressed too far and we're at the breaking point of civilization. Maybe it's just like a writing point of a failed empire. No, the Romans were doing fine. This was like, I don't know when he lived. After that, I read Sulla by Toni... Why did I read it like that? Sulla? After that, I read Sulla by Toni Morrison. This book is about two childhood friends, one who in adulthood goes off to experience the world, and the other who stays in their small town, gets married, and has a family. And it kind of explores this idea of how when you return to a place after you've been changed by the world, you can't truly fit back into that place. And it also sees like how a community adapts to exposure to something new. This one is a lot like Paradise by Toni Morrison, which I read back in November. There's a lot of like setup and you can tell that it's building towards something, but while you're reading it, it kind of feels like a bunch of disjointed conversations, and it doesn't really make sense until the very ending where it like all clicks into place and you're like, oh. It's really hard for me to say how I feel about this one because I don't think that the journey to that like end point of realization, of revelation, was as satisfying as some of her other books. I think that this one paints a really loving portrait of a community and of a people, and it's got some really fun and compelling dialogue and character work. But among the ranking of Toni Morrison books that I've read, I would put this above Jazz, which right now is sitting at the bottom. If you're new here, Toni Morrison is my absolute favorite author, and this is the 7th novel of hers that I've read, but I have read 9 books by her. And even though like this and Jazz are towards the bottom of that ranking, I would be perfectly content if you told me I could only read Toni Morrison books for the rest of my life. After that, I read Salome by Oscar Wilde. It's not this entire book, it's like the last 30 pages. This play tells the biblical story of the execution of John the Baptist at the request of Salome, the daughter of King Herod. And I finally got around to it because I've had some like renewed interest in biblical stories, specifically the New Testament, which we will get into in a minute. But I liked this one a lot. I think it's really cool to take a biblical story but to frame it as like a Greek tragedy. And it's got this really flowery, passionate language that is typical of Oscar Wilde's writing. It was also interesting to see Oscar Wilde's like natural wit and comedic timing applied to something more dramatic, because I think it gave it this excellent flow. A funny thing about this play, though, is that even though Oscar Wilde was English, he wrote it in French, and then this play was translated into English by somebody else, but he didn't like the translation. So what I read was like a translation that he didn't like, but which he had edited. I'm gonna have to learn French for my degree at some point, so maybe that'll be a project. I'll read Salome in the original French. And that brings us to Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth by Reza Aslan. And I know this one is a wild card. Bear with me. I feel like I should preface this review by saying I'm not a religious person. I was raised Catholic, if you couldn't tell. Hello, my name is Gabriel. And a fun fact about me is that it is really difficult for me to fall asleep at night if I don't have like noise playing, but it can't be something interesting, otherwise I will stay up all night listening to it. So I'm subscribed to a lot of random YouTube channels that just post like 2 or 3 hour long lectures. And one night I just stumbled upon a lecture given by Reza Aslan about this book, and instead of falling asleep, I not only stayed up for 3 hours to listen to that lecture, but I stayed up basically all night just watching every lecture I could find, because it was probably one of the most fascinating things I'd ever heard. So, this book is about Jesus of Nazareth as a historical figure. Basically, he starts off by saying that even if you are not a religious person, Jesus of Nazareth was a real person. But since we cannot rely on the Gospels as historical documents, very little is known about him, and all that we do know is that he was a Jewish man who started a Jewish reformist movement with the goal to establish the kingdom of God in 1st century Palestine, and that he was executed by the Roman Empire for the crime of sedition. And using those facts alone and the historical context of what life in 1st century Palestine was like, he is able to construct this really cool portrait of who Jesus of Nazareth might be if we strip away the 2,000 years of like conflicting church ideologies that have been projected upon him. And I think the coolest thing that he like brought to my attention was that in Jesus's time, there were like literally dozens of other false messiahs who were executed by Rome for the exact same crime. The Jewish idea of the Messiah is a man who comes to actually liberate Judea and to reestablish the kingdom of God here on earth. But if your goal is to liberate Judea, then your goal is to overthrow the Roman Empire. And so they were all executed. And what's unique about Jesus is that by all standards of what the Messiah should be, he did not fit them. Because anyone who dies before establishing the kingdom of God here on earth cannot be the Messiah. But rather than accept that, his followers chose to reinterpret what the Messiah and what the kingdom of God even means, turning it into this afterlife idea. And that was an idea which was way less threatening to the Roman Empire than what Judaism was going for. And it's just the most interesting thing I have read in my entire life. It sent me on this like deep rabbit hole reading about like early Christianity and Judaism. This book reminded me of the reason I could never be a historian, because while I love ancient history, for the past year I've been on this like Greek deep dive. We've talked a lot about it, and I've only recently started branching into the Roman stuff like Seneca, but I just cannot commit to a single era. I could never specialize, because once I tapped into the Roman Empire, boom, we're reading about Christianity. I've been trying not to give books like star ratings anymore, because I think that it's really like limiting on how I think about a book, and I don't think that it's the best way for me to convey to you whether I think a book is good or not. But I'm really tempted to give this one 5 stars because it is so interesting. And speaking about the Roman Empire and Roman mythology, I started The Son of Neptune by Rick Riordan. This is the second book in the Heroes of Olympus series. I'm continuing on with my reread this year, and I don't like this. I remember loving this book when I read it when I was 11, 12, I don't know when these came out. But I find that it just feels really unnecessary. I understand that we needed to know like what Percy was up to for the last 6 months, and we need to introduce new Roman characters. But The Lost Hero just set up that exact formula, but for Jason's story. And I just am not interested in reading the exact same book over again, but with Percy. Especially since like Percy's character is annoying me right now, and the other characters aren't that interesting because their character building feels so like lazy. Especially Hazel, oh my god. It feels like the only research he did to write a black character from Louisiana in the 1940s was to like watch Disney's Princess and the Frog. Like I really want to love Hazel's character, but she just feels like such a non-person walking around like, ooh, my mother practiced voodoo and I love beignets and shrimp gumbo. It's just so lazy. Hopefully it gets... I know that it gets better in the next few books because Mark of Athena is excellent. So I just have to push through this one, and then I can get to the real cream of the crop. And that is it for February. This is more than I ever thought I could read in 1 month, especially the shortest month of the year. And I thought that I was going to keep this momentum going, but school has killed me. So I think that by the end of this month, all I will have read is probably just like finishing Son of Neptune and reading half of War and Peace. If you're interested in joining the read-along, it's not too late. You just have a couple days that you need to catch up on. I'll link the announcement video down below so you can get the schedule for it. And expect my week 1 wrap-up in, I guess, less than a week. That's all for today. See you guys next time.